Chapter 1. The Moon's Shadow. There are few names in the lands between that linger in the mind like a half-remembered dream. Soft, distant, yet luminous. Ranni the Witch, the Lunar Princess, the bearer of the dark moon. Her name is whispered by the flicker of candlelight in the study halls of Liurnia. It drifts with the mists that rise from the lakes and echoes faintly in the starlit towers of Carian. To speak her name is to summon an image of a quiet rebellion and a serenity that stands in contrast to the golden order of the world. But before she was a witch, before she renounced the will of the gods, Ranni was a daughter, born into a family that bridged the realms of moonlight and divine flame. Ranni's mother was Queen Renala, the radiant matriarch of the Carian royal family. Her father, Radahn, was the champion of the Golden Order, a vessel of the greater will's power. Together, they were meant to embody the harmony between faith and sorcery, yet their union would become the first fracture in the order they served. In the quiet halls of the Academy of Rea Lucaria, Renala reigned not only as queen, but as a philosopher of the cosmos. Her fascination was with the moon, a celestial mirror that hung above the lands between, constant yet ever-changing. She saw in it the reflection of life's mysteries, waxing and waning, life and death, creation and decay. From the moon, she drew her power, the cold radiance that gave rise to the full moon sorceries that bore her name. To Renala, the moon was a mother. To Radahn, it was a rival. And between their opposing faiths, their children were born, each a living symbol of the rift between the cosmic and the divine. Ranni's birth remains one of the great enigmas of the Carian line. She was said to be Empyrean, a being chosen by the greater will to hold the potential of godhood. Yet, how could that be? For to be Empyrean, one must be born of a single god. And Ranni, as all knew, was a child of two. Some scholars whisper that her conception was not bound by mortal means, that Radahn, being of the same essence as Marika, carried within him the Elden Ring itself, the divine order made flesh. When he left Renala, he gifted her a crimson amber egg, said to contain the great rune of the unborn. Within it flowed the primordial sap of the Erd tree, the liquid essence of life and form. If Ranni was touched by this power, she may not have been born as others were. Perhaps she was woven, her soul crystallized, the convergence of moonlight and the Elden Ring's golden pulse. The amber egg still rests with Renala to this day, glowing faintly with the warmth of remembered life. And from that same divine paradox, Ranni's nature emerged, neither wholly of moon nor wholly of gold, but something between. From her earliest years, Ranni was unlike her siblings. Her brother Radahn bore the blazing hair of giants, his strength tethered to the earth and sky. Her brother Rykard possessed the ambition of flame and the intellect of scholars, always seeking to master the old magics. But Ranni, quiet, pale, and distant, seemed to live half in this world and half in another. Those who served at Carian Manor would recall that the young princess would often disappear for hours, climbing the cliffs to watch the stars rise. She would speak to the constellations as though they were friends she had known in another life. Sometimes she would sleep outside beneath the silver light of the moon, whispering words that no one could understand, words that chilled even the bravest knights. Her mother saw in her a prodigy, a mirror of herself. Ranni taught her the foundations of Carian sorcery, the precise control of glintstone, the discipline of focus, the communion with the cosmos. But even as Ranni mastered her lessons, there was a melancholy in her eyes, a sense of separation, not from ignorance, but from knowing too much. In those days, Liurnia was still a kingdom of scholars, but the influence of the Erd Tree had begun to seep into every corner of the land. The Golden Order, under the guidance of the Two Fingers, claimed dominion over all things born and dying. Faith replaced curiosity, and revelation was favored over discovery. Renala's moon and Marika's tree, two lights that could not coexist. One sought knowledge in the endless cycle of rebirth. The other sought order in the unchanging perfection of divinity. Ranni was born into this rift, and from her earliest days she felt the pull of both. When she gazed upon the Erd Tree's golden glow, she saw not salvation, but domination. The light that claimed to guide all life seemed to her a prison, a force that denied freedom in exchange for control. The moon, by contrast, was silent. It offered no commandments, no laws, only reflection, a mirror for those willing to look upon themselves. It was in this reflection that Ranni saw her truth. She was not meant to serve the greater will. She was meant to defy it. Empyreans are rare, chosen only when the greater will seeks to birth a new god to replace the old. Marika had been one such vessel. So too were her twin children, Michaela and Melania, born of singular divine essence. When the Two Fingers looked upon Ranni, they saw yet another candidate, another pawn to shape the next age of order. But Ranni was not like Marika. Where Marika obeyed, Ranni questioned. Where Marika acted in faith, Ranni acted in reason. And deep within her heart, she felt something that no Empyrean was meant to feel: revulsion toward the voice of the two fingers. When they spoke to her, their words entered her mind like static. Their will pressed upon her like the weight of the Erd tree's roots. And she knew, even as a child, that she would not be their vessel. Ranni's rebellion began not with a sword, but with silence. She simply stopped answering the call. While others bowed before the grace that flowed from the tree, she turned her gaze upward to the stars that the greater will had forgotten. As she grew, her beauty became ethereal, almost unreal. Her skin held the pallor of moonlight, and her eyes shimmered with a faint silver luminescence. But there was a cold to her presence, not cruelty, but distance. Even those who loved her could not help but feel that she was watching them from 1,000 miles away. In Carian legend, it is said that the moon's daughters inherit not its light, but its shadow. They see the world not as it is, but as it might be, unbound from fate, unshackled from divine law. Ranni embodied that legend. Her magic was precise, beautiful, but filled with melancholy. When she cast her glintstone spells, the air itself seemed to quiet, as though the stars were listening. Her teachers whispered that she had the makings of a god. Her mother believed she would carry on the legacy of the full moon. But the girl who watched the sky saw something else. The moon was waning, its light dimming, and beyond it, she sensed something darker still. A second moon, hidden in shadow, whose light could only be seen by those willing to abandon the sun. This she would later call the Dark Moon, and from that moment, her fate was sealed. When Ranni first felt the whisper of the stars, it was during a quiet night at the peak of her youth. The war between faith and reason raged unseen below, but she sat alone on the cliffs of Liurnia, her feet dangling over the misty lake. Above her, the constellations shimmered in patterns that had not been seen since before the Erd tree's rise. And in that silence, she heard it, a faint hum, almost like a voice. It was not the greater will. It was older, softer, a call from the cosmos itself. Some believe it was the voice of the dark moon, the antithesis of the Erd tree, a hidden god of cold night and stillness. Others say it was simply Ranni's own soul yearning for freedom. But whatever the truth, it awakened in her a conviction that would define her life. If fate could be written by the stars, then it could also be rewritten. And so began her lifelong quest to sever the Golden Order, to reject the will of the Erd tree, and to bring about not an age of light, but of night, not of grace, but of choice. Though few knew it then, Ranni's quiet defiance would echo across the ages. It was the seed of a rebellion that would one day reshape the very structure of reality. But even as she began her path toward destiny, she remained gentle in her bearing, calm, deliberate, and patient. She spoke seldom, acted only when necessary, and always with purpose. Her attendants, the first of her loyal followers, would later say she possessed an aura of inevitability. When she entered a room, it was as though time itself paused to listen. When she spoke, her words carried the weight of a future already written. To her mother, she remained a distant daughter, loved but lost. To the scholars of Liurnia, she was a prodigy, a glimpse into the divine mind of sorcery. To the Two Fingers, she was a threat, a silent question that the greater will could not answer. And to the moon, she was its truest child, both its light and its shadow. So began the story of Ranni the Witch, not with conquest, but contemplation. She was born of two faiths and belonged fully to neither. In her, the moon and the Erd tree met, and from that meeting came a paradox the world could not contain. She would walk between the golden light and the starry dark, bearing within her the burden of both. And when the time came, she would choose her side. But that choice, that would come later, on a night of black knives, when the stars themselves held their breath. Chapter 2: The Carian Legacy and the Rise of the Full Moon. The story of Ranni cannot be told without first tracing the silver thread of her lineage. The Carians, rulers of Liurnia of the Lakes. Long before the shattering, long before the Erd tree's light reached every horizon, the Carian royal family ruled not through conquest, but through knowledge. Their kingdom was not built of stone and sword, but of study, of mastery, and of starlight. Liurnia itself was a realm born of reflection. Its broad lakes mirrored the sky so clearly that the people came to believe their destinies were written upon the water. At its heart stood Rea Lucaria, the Grand Academy of Sorcery, and above it, on the cliffs, stood Caria Manor, home to the royal family. Between these two places, one of scholars, the other of sovereigns, the boundary between magic and monarchy blurred. It was said that every ruler of Caria must first be a scholar, and every scholar must first understand the humility of the stars. Before she was queen, Rennala was a prodigy of the academy, the brightest of the glintstone mages. Her mind was like a prism, bending and focusing light into revelations that few could follow. But her heart was fixed upon one celestial body above all others, the moon. To Rennala, the moon was both teacher and lover, a constant companion in the sky. When she meditated beneath its glow, she claimed to hear the whispers of its pale light, not voices of gods, but the gentle murmur of the cosmos itself. It was from these whispers that she derived the sorceries of the full moon, glintstone spells so pure and refined that they seemed to channel the moonlight directly. Her mastery earned her reverence within the academy, and soon the mages of Rea Lucaria rallied behind her. But it was not knowledge alone that made her queen. It was her vision. Ranala believed that the moon's wisdom should not be confined to scholars. It should guide all of Liurnia as the Erd Tree guided the rest of the world. And so, with conviction and the support of her fellow sorcerers, she crowned herself Queen of Carian, ruler by wisdom, not decree. The full moon became the symbol of her reign, a perfect circle of light that represented truth, reflection, and the eternal cycle of rebirth. Under Ranala's rule, the Carian royal family governed Liurnia from the heights above the lake. Carian Manor was their seat, a fortress of elegance and magic. Its walls were imbued with enchantments that shimmered like ripples in water. Visitors who approached uninvited would find themselves lost in illusions, walking in circles beneath the same silver trees. Within those walls lived the House of Carian, its members devoted to the pursuit of cosmic knowledge. The royal bloodline was believed to be touched by the stars themselves, the divine right granted not by faith, but by intellect. From this lineage came Ranni, Radahn, and Rykard, three heirs, each reflecting a different facet of their parents' power. Ranni inherited the moon's quiet intellect, Rykard the fire of ambition, and Radahn the strength of the heavens. But beneath the harmony of their upbringing, there lay a growing tension, a quiet storm between the old powers of the moon and the rising faith of the Erd Tree. It began when Radahn, the red-haired champion of the Golden Order, came to Liurnia. He was a figure of fire and faith, radiant and composed, his very presence said to still the hearts of men. At first, he came as an emissary to bridge the gulf between the Golden Order and the scholars of Liurnia. But as time passed, his visits became more frequent and his eyes more fixed upon Ranala. What began as admiration grew into something deeper. They shared nights of study beneath the moonlight, debating the nature of creation. Radahn speaking of grace and divine perfection, Ranala speaking of cycles and impermanence. They found in each other a reflection of what they lacked. He, her intellect, she, his conviction. Their union was one of ideals before it was one of love. Together, they sought a synthesis, a world where the moon and the tree might coexist, where reason and faith could walk hand in hand. But such harmony was not meant to last. When Radahn and Ranala wed, the people of Liurnia rejoiced. It was seen as a sign that the Golden Order and the Carian tradition could at last find peace. Children were born of this union, Rykard, Radahn, and Ranni, and for a time the world seemed balanced. Yet, even in that peace, the seeds of division were already sown. The Golden Order was a faith of singular truth. The Carian path was the philosophy of many. In the halls of Rea Lucaria, scholars began to whisper that the Golden Order's doctrines were corrupting their queen's wisdom. And in the courts of Leyndell, priests murmured that Radahn had strayed from his holy purpose. For the Erd Tree and the moon cannot share the same sky forever, and when Marika called her consort back to the capital, when Radahn abandoned Rennala to become the Elden Lord, the harmony between light and reflection shattered. Rennala's heart broke, and the Academy fractured with it. In the days following Radahnn's departure, Rea Lucaria descended into chaos. The scholars split into factions, some loyal to the Golden Order, others devoted to Rennala's moon. Wars of words turned to wars of sorcery. The lakes themselves were said to glow red with the afterburn of glintstone magic. Rennala, bereft of her husband and her purpose, turned inward. Her brilliance curdled into obsession. She withdrew to her chambers, clutching the amber egg that Radahn had left behind, a relic said to contain the great rune of the unborn. To her, it was a promise of restoration, that through rebirth she might return to the days of wholeness. Thus began her tragic transformation from queen to mother, not of a kingdom, but of countless children reborn through her sorcery. She became the queen of the full moon, but her light was cold and hollow. Her legacy fractured as her mind did, and the once proud scholars of Liurnia became scattered remnants beneath her waning power. It was in this fallen court that Ranni's purpose began to crystallize, for in her mother's despair, she saw the cost of the Golden Order's divine tyranny. To understand Ranni's defiance, one must understand what the moon meant to her mother, and how the daughter came to see beyond it. To Rennala, the moon was the source of wisdom. Its light was the guiding principle of rebirth, not the endless life promised by the Erd Tree, but a cyclical renewal, ever changing, ever learning. She believed that knowledge itself was divine, that through study and reincarnation, one might inch closer to understanding the cosmic order. But Ranni saw further. To her, the moon's light was only half the truth. It illuminated, yes, but it also concealed. For beyond the full moon lay its shadow, the dark moon, whose light did not reflect, but absorbed. Where Rennala sought to understand the world, Ranni sought to transcend it. The daughter would become what the mother could not, a seeker not of wisdom, but of freedom. While the scholars of the academy wielded glintstone staffs, the Carian knights bore blades infused with lunar magic. Their armor shimmered faintly with blue enchantments, and their blades left trails of starlight in the air. They were not merely soldiers. They were the guardians of knowledge, sworn to defend the royal bloodline and the secrets of the moon. Among them were figures of legend: Royal Knight Iji, the giant smith whose loyalty would one day serve Ranni, and lunar knights who vanished into the mists when their queen's light faded. Their duty was not to conquer, but to protect, to preserve the moon's reflection upon the lake, even as the Erd tree's shadow grew longer. The knights trained Ranni as one of their own. Though she preferred the stillness of study, she learned the art of the sword, not to wield it in war, but to understand its weight. To the Carians, balance was sacred. Intellect without strength was fragility, and strength without intellect was folly. In their rituals, they spoke often of fate, of how the stars guided the course of all things. Ranni listened, but even then, she felt that fate was a cage, and in her quiet heart, she began to dream of the day when even the stars themselves could be defied. With Radahn gone and Rennala lost in grief, Liurnia fell into decline. The academy closed its gates. The lake grew still. Travelers who ventured into its mists spoke of an eerie music, lullabies sung by the reborn children of the queen. The brilliance of the full moon had dimmed, and the kingdom that once shone with intellect and magic was now a quiet graveyard of forgotten dreams. Yet from that stillness, a new light began to rise. Ranni withdrew from her mother's court and built her own sanctum, a tower upon the cliffs where the moonlight was coldest and the stars closest. There, she meditated upon the cycles of light and dark, and upon the destiny written for her by the greater will. She saw how her mother's devotion to the moon had ended in sorrow, and how her father's devotion to the tree had led to tyranny, and she vowed that she would follow neither. The rise of the full moon marked the beginning of Caria's greatness, and its fall marked by the birth of something greater still, the will of a daughter who refused to inherit her mother's chains. From the shimmering lakes of Liurnia to the silent halls of her tower, Ranni carried within her both the brilliance and the sorrow of her lineage. The Carians had sought wisdom in the stars. Rennala had sought salvation in rebirth. But Ranni would seek freedom, not in the reflection of the moon, but in the darkness that lay beyond it. For within that darkness, she sensed something vast, something patient, and something waiting, and it would soon answer her call. Chapter 3: The Empyrean's Burden. Empyrean. It is a word whispered with reverence in the lands between, though few truly understand what it means. To most, it is a title, a mark of divinity bestowed upon those chosen by the two fingers to inherit godhood. But to those who bear it, it is not a blessing. It is a weight, a chain forged of destiny, invisible yet unbreakable. Ranni bore that title from birth, and from the moment she understood what it meant, she despised it. The greater will is not a god in form, but a force, a vast intelligence that governs the balance of order across the cosmos. It is the mind behind the Erd Tree, and the architect of the Golden Order, and the unseen hand that guides all mortal fate. Its will flows through the two fingers, emissaries that interpret and command its desires. Through them, Empyreans are selected, vessels through which the greater will may one day remake the world. To most, this is a gift beyond comprehension. To Ranni, it was a silent invasion. When she was young, the two fingers called to her, not in voice, but in thought, a deep vibration in her soul, like the hum of the distant stars. Their message was simple, but absolute. You are chosen. You will become the next vessel of our will. But Ranni did not rejoice. She did not kneel. The voice within her mind was cold and mechanical, stripped of warmth and mercy. It spoke of fate as though it were a chain, and of order as though it were law. And in that moment, Ranni realized the truth that many never see. To be chosen by the greater will is not to be free. It is to be claimed. The greater will governs by grace, an unseen radiance that flows through the Erd Tree and its roots, touching all who dwell beneath it. Grace guides the tarnished, blesses the faithful, and binds the souls of men in a cycle of endless servitude. It is a force that promises purpose, but demands obedience. Ranni, even as a child, could feel that grace pressing upon her. It was warm, radiant, and suffocating. She saw how it bent the minds of kings, how it silenced the curiosity of scholars, how it promised eternal life only to deny true freedom. And she saw how her father Radahn had become its puppet, a reflection of Marika's will, split in two, yet bound to one purpose. Even gods were not free. They were instruments. In that realization, Ranni's hatred of the greater will was born. She would not be a vessel. She would not be shaped into another tool of order. If the Erd Tree ruled the day, then she would serve the night. If grace commanded obedience, then she would build her own fate from disobedience. It was not anger that fueled her rebellion. It was clarity, the serene kind of clarity that only those who see the entire pattern can feel. When Ranni looked to the Erd tree, she saw a god that spoke too loudly, but when she looked to the moon, she found quiet. Its light offered no commandments, no sermons. It simply was. It illuminated without demanding, revealed without binding. In its silence, she found her truth. Where the greater will proclaimed destiny, the moon whispered possibility. Where grace shackled, moonlight reflected, revealing paths that might yet be. And so, Ranni began to commune, not with the fingers of the greater will, but with the stars. Through long nights of meditation and study, she attuned herself to their rhythm. Each star pulsed with its own will, its own story. She came to believe that every soul was like a star, distant, luminous, and sovereign. Each could burn or fade according to its own nature, not by the decree of divine law. But this communion brought her more than insight. It brought her the attention of something else, something vast, ancient, and patient, watching from the deep dark beyond the known firmament. Whether it was the dark moon or another celestial being, none could say, but Ranni felt its presence, and it felt hers in return. It did not speak to her, it did not command, it simply acknowledged her, and in that mutual recognition, Ranni found what no Empyrean of the greater will ever had, a god that treated her as equal. In the ages before the shattering, there were 3 Empyreans chosen by the greater will, Ranni, Miquella, and Melania. Each was meant to embody the divine in a new form. Each, in their own way, rejected their purpose. Melania, cursed by the scarlet rot, sought to ascend through suffering, her body decaying even as her spirit grew divine. Miquella, eternally young, tried to rewrite the very laws of faith to protect his sister from the outer gods, and Ranni, she turned her back on all of it. She refused to be the vessel of grace, even if it meant destroying herself to be free. In them, we see 3 paths of rebellion, through endurance, through compassion, and through defiance. But of the 3, only Ranni's would come to alter the very stars themselves. It is said that the stars guide all destinies in the lands between. Every hero, every god, every soul, each has its own path written among the constellations. When the greater will descended upon the world, it imposed its own light upon those stars, altering their natural course. Fate was no longer free, it was directed. And the stars that once pulsed with their own rhythm now moved to the heartbeat of the Erd tree. Ranni came to understand this through her studies of astrology and glintstone. The blue glintstone of Liurnia was believed to be crystallized starlight, fragments of the heavens themselves, holding within them the memories of the cosmos. Through these stones, she learned that fate could be seen, traced, and perhaps even rewritten. she began to see the faint threads of destiny, silver lines woven through all living beings, and she realized that if she could cut those threads, she could unbind herself from the greater will's control. But to sever fate was to commit heresy of the highest order. It would mean war with the gods themselves. And yet, in her quiet heart, she had already made her choice. When the two fingers called her again, Ranni did not answer. Their servants, envoys of the greater will, came to her tower, bearing words of divine appointment. They spoke of duty, of purpose, of the honor of becoming God. They told her that through her, the Golden Order would be renewed. She listened. Then, with calm voice and colder eyes, she said, "I would sooner die than serve." They left in silence, but their wrath would echo in the ages to come. The greater will does not forgive rebellion, and the moment Ranni turned away, the eyes of the cosmos turned upon her. In the days that followed, Ranni vanished from Liurnia's courts. For years, she was not seen, and even her servants whispered that she had perished. But far to the north, in the frozen lands of the mountain tops of the giants, an old legend began to stir, of a witch who communed with the moon and commanded the cold itself. It was there that Ranni met the one who would become her mentor, the snow witch known as Renna. Renna's origins were shrouded in frost and secrecy. Some say she was once a Carian scholar. Others believe she was a manifestation of the dark moon itself. What is certain is that she taught Ranni to harness the cold, not as mere magic, but as philosophy. Cold, she said, is not absence. It is stillness. It is freedom from decay, from passion, from the fever of the world. Through cold, the stars can be seen clearly. Through stillness, the truth of fate can be revealed. Under Renna's guidance, Ranni's soul grew colder, more distant, but also more focused. She learned the art of detachment, the power to observe the world without being bound by it. In time, she would take her mentor's name as her own disguise, Renna, when she moved among mortals once again. But for now, she remained in the snow, preparing for what she knew must come. To reject the greater will was not enough. To be free, Ranni would need to destroy the connection entirely, to sever her soul from the body the gods had claimed. She began to study the forbidden arts, the power of death, the runes of black flame, and the mysteries of the eternal cities where the greater will's influence could not reach. There, she learned of the rune of death, the fragment of destined death once sealed away by Marika herself. If she could obtain it, she could end her divine body without destroying her soul. Only then could she truly escape the control of fate. But such an act would shatter the order of the world. It would be a betrayal of both God and kin, it would set in motion the tragedy that one day would be remembered as the Night of the Black Knives. And so, as the Erd Tree's golden glow illuminated the world, Ranni turned her gaze to the shadow it cast, for in that shadow lay her freedom and the doom of all who served the light. Ranni's rebellion did not begin with a blade, but with a thought, the quiet realization that even gods were not free. Where others saw divinity, she saw tyranny. Where others prayed for grace, she sought to silence it. And though her defiance would plunge the world into darkness, it would also awaken something long dormant, the possibility of choice. In rejecting the greater will, she did not merely rebel against a god, she rebelled against destiny itself. And the stars, long held captive by the pull of the Erd Tree, began to tremble. The age of obedience was ending. The age of defiance of the dark moon was about to begin. Chapter 4: The Night of the Black Knives. There are nights in history that do not end. They linger like a stain upon the fabric of time, silent, eternal, and with heavy consequence. One such night was the Night of the Black Knives. It began without warning. No omen marked its arrival. The winds did not howl. The Erd Tree's light did not flicker. Yet by dawn, the very order of the world had been wounded, a scar that even gods could not heal, and at the heart of it stood Ranni the Witch. In the ages before that night, death had been bound. When Queen Marika removed the rune of death, the fragment of destined death, from the Elden Ring, she sealed mortality itself. No true death could touch the demigods or the divine. The cycle of life and decay was broken, and all that lived beneath the Erd Tree was meant to live forever. But death is not a thing that can be caged. It waits, it listens, and when called upon by those desperate enough, it answers. Ranni's studies into forbidden lore had brought her to that precipice, the understanding that the only way to escape the greater will was through death itself. Not death in the mortal sense, but death of the divine body that bound her to fate. She would have to die to be free, yet to touch the power of death was blasphemy. It was to stand against the order of the Erd Tree, against Marika, against all life that drew breath within its shade. Still, Ranni's resolve did not falter. Freedom to her was worth even the end of the gods. Deep within the sanctum of Farum Azula, the rune of death was guarded by Malekith, the Black Blade, Marika's loyal shadow, sworn to protect it for eternity. It was said that not even the stars could reach the place where he kept it, for it lay suspended in time, eternally circling the storm. Yet, Ranni found a way. How she did it remains one of the great mysteries of the age. Some believe she communed with those who dwelled in the shadows of the Erd Tree, the assassins born of the eternal cities, whose lineage traced back to gods forgotten. Others claim that she simply asked, and that death itself, sensing her sincerity, listened. However it came to pass, the rune of death was stolen, not in its entirety, but a fragment, enough to alter the course of eternity, enough to kill a god. Those who carried out Ranni's will were known as the Black Knife Assassins, women born of the eternal cities, their souls half human and half shadow. Their blades were forged with a trace of the stolen rune, their edges burning with black flame, the fire of true death. On that night, they moved like whispers. No torch betrayed them, no armor clinked in the dark. They glided across the moonlit grass, their veils trailing behind them like falling stars. Their target was Godwyn the Golden, beloved son of Marika, heir to the golden lineage, and Ranni's own brother by blood through Radahn. He was not a tyrant, nor an enemy, but he was chosen. He was destined to carry the greater will's light into the next age, and because of that, he had to die. Ranni's rebellion began not with hate, but with sacrifice. She would kill the beloved, not to destroy him, but to shatter the chains that bound them all. Godwyn's death was not like any other. When the knives struck, the black flame devoured not his body, but his soul. He became the first of the demigods to die, and yet he did not truly die. His flesh remained, his golden hair unburnt, but his spirit was gone, hollowed out, replaced by the silence of true death. In that moment, a terrible imbalance was born. Life and soul, once intertwined, were torn apart. Half of death went to Godwyn, the other half to Ranni. For Ranni had not only orchestrated the assassin, she had turned the rune upon herself. The assassin's work was swift. The palace was silent, but far away in her tower, Ranni performed her own ritual. Alone, beneath the light of the dark moon, she raised her hand and invoked the fragment of destined death. She felt it burn within her chest, not as pain, but as release. Her body, the divine vessel chosen by the greater will, began to fade. Her soul slipped free, untethered from the golden curse that had bound it since birth. When dawn came, Ranni's mortal form was cold. Her eyes, once silver, were dim, but her spirit lived, housed within a new vessel of her own making, the doll, modeled after her mentor, the Snow Witch Renna. She had died by her own hand, and yet in that death she had achieved what none before her could. She had escaped fate. The death of two Empyreans in one night, one in soul, one in flesh, sent shockwaves through the fabric of the world. The Erd tree wept golden sap like blood. The two fingers trembled. The stars themselves seemed to dim, their rhythm disrupted by the sudden rupture in fate. For the first time, true death had returned to the lands between, and with it, fear. In the halls of Landell, Marika's grief turned to madness. Her beloved son's soulless corpse became the symbol of her failure, the wound that would never close. Some say it was this moment, not the later wars, that the ambitions of lords that began the shattering. The death of Godwyn the Golden broke something fundamental in her, and in her despair, she shattered the Elden Ring itself. Godwyn's corpse did not rest. Beneath the roots of the Erd tree, his body began to change. From the wound left by the black flame, a dark rot began to spread, not like the rot of decay, but of corruption. His flesh twisted and bloomed into grotesque forms, and his face became a symbol of eternal suffering. Wherever his roots reached, death followed. The souls of the dead, denied their natural passage, clung to the world as phantoms. Thus was born the death root, those who live in death, a cursed lineage of beings caught between life and the grave. The Golden Order declared them abominations, but Ranni saw in them something else, a reflection of her own condition, souls without masters, beings unclaimed by the greater will, free. When the truth of that night spread, none dared speak Ranni's name aloud. The Carians mourned in silence. The scholars of the academy whispered that their princess had vanished into the dark. To the greater will, she was a traitor. To the Golden Order, she was a ghost. But to the stars, she was the one who had freed them. For the death of Godwyn had broken the lock that held the heavens still. The constellations that had once been frozen began to stir again, though faintly, hesitantly. Fate itself had begun to move once more, though now without guidance. And in that uncertainty, the seeds of a new age began to grow. Freedom always comes at a cost. Ranni had severed herself from the greater will, but in doing so, she had also severed herself from all life. No longer did she feel warmth. No longer did she dream. Her new form, the doll, was eternal, untouchable, and cold. She was beyond the grasp of grace, but also beyond love. Those who looked upon her in the years to come would describe her as serene, distant, and unchanging, like the moon itself. She smiled rarely, spoke softly, and never again sought the comfort of the living. She had achieved her goal, to exist free of the gods, but in that freedom she had become a ghost. And yet, this was not the end of her story. It was only the first act of her grand design, a plan to build a new order, not of grace or flame, but of starlight and silence. The age of stars had not yet dawned, but its herald now walked the world unseen. The night of the Black Knives was the death of the old world and the birth of the new one. It marked the first time that fate had been defied, and that the gods had been wounded by their own. It was the night when death returned to the lands between, and the night when the daughter of the moon chose freedom over eternity. And though the world would remember it as a tragedy, Ranni would remember it as deliverance. For she had not slain her brother, but her destiny. She had killed the god within herself, and in doing so, had become something far greater, not a servant of the light, not a creature of the dark, but the first true being of choice. And as the dawn broke over the silent world, the moon watched from above, cold, pale, and unblinking. It had found its champion. Chapter 5: The Doll and the Snow Witch. When the night of the Black Knives ended, the lands between awoke in quiet horror. The Erd Tree bled light, the stars trembled, and far away, in a silent tower overlooking the lake, a pale figure opened her eyes for the first time. She no longer felt the pulse of a heart. No warmth stirred beneath her skin. Her senses were muted, her voice soft, her form unmoving. And yet she lived. Ranni, the Lunar princess, the Empyrean, had returned, but not as she once was. She was a doll, handcrafted in the likeness of her old mentor, the Snow Witch Ranni. Porcelain skin, eyes of silver glass, a voice as faint as breath on frost. She was no longer bound to the Erd Tree, nor to the greater will. She was beyond them now, a soul encased in stillness, reborn under the silent gaze of the moon. Ranni's first moments in the new body were dreamlike. She remembered dying. She remembered the cold that followed, the black flame burning through her divine vessel, consuming the part of her that was chosen. Then, nothing, until she awoke within this quiet, unmoving shell. The room around her was dim. Frost glimmered faintly on the walls, as though winter itself had been waiting for her return. Her hands were delicate, jointed at the wrists, their movement smooth but mechanical. When she spoke, her voice echoed softly within the hollow of her chest, calm, distant, and unfamiliar. The moonlight filtering through the window touched her face, and for the first time, she saw her reflection, a girl of porcelain, eyes wide and cold, a faint shimmer of magic pulsing in their depths. She had traded warmth for eternity. At first, she wondered if this was death, to exist in silence, feeling nothing but awareness. But as the hours passed, she began to understand. This was not death. This was freedom, made manifest. The doll's face was not her own. It was the face of the Snow Witch Ranni, the woman who had taught her the true meaning of stillness. Ranni had lived centuries earlier, a figure of myth among the frozen north. Her teachings survived only in fragments, runes carved in ice, incantations whispered in the tongues of wolves. Ranni had believed that cold was not the absence of life, but its perfection. Where flame burns and decays, frost preserves. Where heat demands movement, ice enforces reflection. Through cold, one might see truth unclouded, the pure silence beneath all things. It was Ranni who taught Ranni to listen to the moon's stillness, to cease striving for understanding, and instead become part of the quiet. In her final years, Ranni vanished into the blizzard, leaving only legends and a single phrase carved upon a stone altar. To still the flame is to awaken the stars. When Ranni forged her doll, she chose Ranni's image for a reason: to honor her teacher and to remind herself that stillness was not death, but transcendence. The days that followed were long and quiet. Ranni no longer slept, for sleep belonged to the living. She did not eat or breathe. Her senses dulled to the hum of the world. No heartbeat, no hunger, no fear. The cold around her was constant, not biting, but soft, a comfort that reminded her of the night sky. She sat at the window of her tower, watching the moon's slow journey across the heavens. It had been the source of her power once, but now it was her companion. She saw in its distant glow the reflection of her own new one, silent, patient, and eternal. Days turned to weeks, weeks to years. Outside, the world descended into chaos. The shattering began. The demigods warred over the broken fragments of the Elden Ring, each grasping for power and meaning in a world that had lost both. But Ranni watched from afar, untouched. She did not seek dominion or glory. Her rebellion was not one of conquest, but of absence. She had already achieved what others could not: escape. Yet even in stillness, she was not alone. Her actions had drawn others to her. Those who had served her before, and some who had never met her, felt the echo of her will ripple through the stars. It called to them in dreams, in whispers, in faint glimmers of moonlight reflected on still water. The first to find her was Blade, the half-wolf knight bound to her soul. Born from her shadow, created by the two fingers to serve as her protector. He had been torn between loyalty and love, between the will of the gods and the will of his lady. When Ranni died, he had felt the wound in his spirit, as if half his being had vanished. When she rose again, he came to her side, kneeling in silent devotion. Next came Saluvius, the sorcerer of twisted ambition. Cunning, deceitful, and arrogant, he sought Ranni's favor not out of loyalty, but curiosity. He saw in her rebirth a miracle, a soul untethered from the divine, a secret worth mastering. She tolerated him, for knowledge has its uses, even in the service of deceit. And then came Iji, the gentle giant and royal blacksmith, who had once forged arms for the Carian knights. He came not for ambition, but for love, love of his princess, of her mother, of the peace they once brought to Liurnia. He vowed to serve her, to protect her secret, and to ensure no harm came to those she still called friend. Together, they formed her new court, not of nobles and scholars, but of exiles and outcasts, bound not by oath, but by choice. And choice, to Ranni, was the highest form of devotion. Though she had found freedom, Ranni soon learned that stillness too had its burdens. The doll's body was perfect in its construction, but limited in expression. Her movements were slow, deliberate, and her senses dull to the texture of life. She could see beauty, but not feel it. She could understand sorrow, but not weep for it. Every emotion was a memory, not a sensation. This detachment became her greatest trial. Freedom, she realized, was not peace, it was loneliness. On nights when the wind carried the faint music of Liurnia across the lake, she would close her eyes and remember the warmth of her mother's embrace, the laughter of her brothers, the scent of glintstone dust in the academy halls. She remembered love, but like the light of distant stars, it reached her too late. And yet, she did not regret her choice. To feel nothing was a small price to pay for the right to choose her own path. As her body remained still, her mind deepened. She turned her attention to the study of cold sorceries, the art Renna had left behind. Through them, she found a way to understand her own existence, not as a flaw, but as a state of being. The frost sorceries were unlike the glintstone magics of the Academy. Where glintstone harnessed light, frost harnessed absence. It was magic drawn not from the stars' heat, but from the silence between them. When Ranni wove a spell of ice, she did not create, she erased. Her power was the power to still motion, to halt decay, to freeze time itself for a breath. Her spells did not burn, but hushed. A frost mist would bloom around her, quieting even the sound of her own voice. To witness her casting was to see beauty so delicate it felt unreal. The snow falling in perfect stillness, reflecting the faint glow of her silver eyes. In these sorceries, Ranni found the perfect mirror of her philosophy. To rule was not to command, but to still. To lead was not to guide, but to allow the world to rest. Though her body was still and her expression calm, within Ranni's mind burned a single truth. The world of gods and grace could not endure. The greater will had imposed its order through illusion and control, but illusion cannot last forever, and in the wake of the shattering, she saw opportunity. Her death had freed her from the gods, but it had also freed her to build something new, something beyond the reach of grace, flame, or rot. A new order, born not of control, but of infinite distance. An age of stars. This vision did not come to her in revelation, but in quiet contemplation. Night after night, she watched the moon reflect upon the lake. She imagined a world without divine interference, where each soul would burn or fade according to its own rhythm, like the stars above. It would be a cold age, yes, distant and silent, but it would be free. And so the doll began to plan, while the demigods waged war and the world fell into ruin. Ranni the Witch prepared in stillness. She studied the stars. She traced their movements. She watched for the moment when fate, long frozen by her half-brother Radahn, would begin to stir again. For when the stars moved once more, her destiny would awaken with them. In time, the world forgot her face. Legends spoke of Ranni the Witch, the traitor who stole death. The Erd-tree priests called her heretic. The Carians called her vanished, and the scholars of Rea Lucaria dismissed her as myth. But those who sought truth, the Tarnished who wandered the lands between, would one day find her tower upon the cliffs of Liurnia. And when they did, she would greet them with words as calm as winter wind. I am the witch Ranni. I stole death long ago, and in my body I cast it away. Her voice, soft and deliberate, carried the serenity of centuries. The world saw a doll, but behind the glass eyes, a will older and colder than any god looked back. Thus, the Empyrean who once lived in gold was reborn in silver and frost. She who had defied the greater will found her sanctuary in stillness, her soul encased in porcelain, her heart bound to the moon. Ranni's new form was both prison and liberation, a symbol of all she had lost and of all she had gained. For though she could no longer feel warmth, she had found clarity. Though she could no longer love, she had found purpose. And though she had died, she had never been more alive. The Snow Witch had taught her that cold is not the end, but the beginning of eternity. And now Ranni would teach that lesson to the world. In silence, she waited, watching the still sky, for the stars to move once again. Chapter 6. The War of the Stars, General Radahn and the Halted Heavens. The night sky of the lands between once moved like breath, the constellations drifting gently through their courses, the stars guiding fates as surely as rivers carve valleys. But then the heavens grew still. No star rose, no star fell. The night became a frozen tapestry. It was said that time itself had been caught in its own reflection. And at the center of that stillness stood a single name, spoken with awe and sorrow both. Radahn, the red lion of the battlefield, the lord of gravity, Ranni's brother. Radahn was born to the same parents as Ranni, Rennala, queen of the full moon, and Radahn, champion of the Golden Order. He inherited from his mother a fascination with the cosmos, and from his father the fiery strength of divine blood. His hair was a blaze of red, said to mark the lineage of giants, beings who had once warred against the Erd Tree's light. From birth, he was a contradiction of fire and moonlight, of intellect and instinct. He grew quickly into a figure of immense stature, both in body and spirit. His childhood was filled with stories of valor, of Godfrey, the first Elden Lord, who had once tamed the battlefields as easily as a smith bends iron. Radahn adored those tales. He longed not for peace, but for glory, for the joy of combat, for the roar of armies, for the bond between warriors who face death together. He trained in the Carian arts of sorcery, but his heart remained drawn to the physical, to the tangible. Steel, soil, and storm. These were his teachers. And yet, it was in the realm of the unseen that his legend would be written. It began with his horse, a small, unassuming creature, too small in truth for a man of his colossal size. But Radahn loved the beast dearly and refused to abandon it. Even as his body grew to titanic proportions, he vowed never to leave it behind. And so, in pursuit of that simple vow, he turned his study towards the ancient art of gravity magic. In the town of Celia, deep within Halted, lived a sect of scholars known as the Alabaster Lords, ancient beings with stone skin and knowledge of the stars. From them, Radahn learned to bend the laws of the cosmos. He learned how to pull upon the invisible strings that bound all matter, to make heavy things light, and to still the motion of the heavens themselves. What began as an act of affection, a spell to keep his beloved horse beneath him, became a mastery that shook the firmament. Radahn grew powerful beyond reckoning. His arrows could reach the horizon. His presence could alter the pole of the earth. And above all, he gained dominion over the sky. In his youth, he would ride beneath the stars, laughing, his horse galloping across the field of purple dusk. But as his mastery deepened, that laughter faded, for he began to hear the stars whispering to him, and among their whispers, he heard his sister's name. Ranni's destiny was bound to the movement of the heavens. She had severed her connection to the greater will, but in doing so, she had anchored her soul to the stars, to their light, to their rhythm, their promise of change. To fulfill her purpose, she needed the stars to move. They were her compass, her fate. But Radahn, in his pursuit of strength, halted them. Whether by accident or intent, his magic stilled the entire firmament. The stars ceased their eternal motion, suspended in perfect silence, and with them, Ranni's fate was locked away. The world entered an era of stasis. The heavens no longer guided destiny, and fate became an echo of itself. The greater will's grace dimmed. The flow of time felt heavy, as though caught in unseen chains. To many, this was a miracle, a sign that the might of mortals had matched the gods. To Ranni, it was a prison. From her tower in Liurnia, Ranni watched the sky each night, searching for a single sign of movement, a comet's trail, a shifting constellation, any whisper that the stars yet lived. But they remained still, frozen like the surface of a lake in winter. She knew what this meant. She knew whose hand had done it. And though her voice never rose, her thoughts echoed through the night. Radahn, my brother, what have you done? Yet she did not hate him. She understood. Radahn's heart was not malicious. He sought mastery, not dominance. He halted the stars not to defy her, but to prove that mortals could defy gods. Yet still, his strength had become the wall that barred her from her destiny, and until he fell, her age, the age of stars, could not begin. Despite the chasm that divided them, a bond of respect endured between the siblings. Ranni loved Radahn as one might love the mountain that blocks the sun, with awe and with sorrow. She could not reach her future without unseating him, but she could not despise the very thing that made him magnificent. Theirs was the tragedy of reflection. He embodied the power to hold the world still, she the will to set it free, and between them lay the eternal night. When the shattering came, and the demigods rose in war, Radahn stood among the mightiest. He commanded legions of soldiers who worshipped him not as Lord, but as God of war incarnate. His armor shone crimson beneath the sun, his mane flowing like fire, his blade a great curved sword that cleaved the wind itself. He faced countless foes and never knew defeat. But his greatest battle was not against any army. It was against Melania, the blade of Miquella, sister of Rot, Empyrean of Scarlet Bloom. Their clash in Halted was a calamity that scarred the land forever. The ground split and burned, the air filled with ash. When Melania's body broke and her strength waned, she unleashed the power within her, the Scarlet Rot, a curse that spread across the battlefield like fire through dry grass. Radahn fought on, even as the rot ate at his flesh, even as his mind began to crumble. He held the stars in place, even as he forgot his own name. When the battle ended, there was no victor, only ruin. Halted became a wasteland of corruption, and Radahn, once the brightest of warriors, became a beast of mindless hunger, a fallen god chasing ghosts across the desert sky. Years later, long after the wars had faded to myth, a gathering took place at Redmane Castle, a festival to honor Radahn, the Lord of Gravity, through battle. Warriors from across the lands between came to end his suffering, not out of hatred, but reverence, for they knew that to fight Radahn was to fight the stars themselves. The duel was not a slaughter, it was a requiem. When the final blow struck, the stars stirred for the first time in centuries. The firmament shuddered, and one by one, the constellations began to move again. a single comet broke free of the sky, tearing through the void with the brilliance of a dying sun. It fell towards the earth, carving a wound through the heavens, and came to rest upon the lands below. In the depths where Nokron, the eternal city, lay hidden. And in that moment, far away from her tower, Ranni opened her eyes. The stars had begun to move again. Her destiny, long frozen, had awakened. Though the world would celebrate Radahn's fall as the liberation of fate, Ranni did not rejoice. She felt the stirring of her purpose, yes, but also the quiet ache of loss. Her brother, though corrupted, had been the last light of her bloodline's glory. Now his fire had gone out, and as the moon resumed its course across the night sky, its light fell gently upon the desert where his body lay, turning the blood-stained sands silver. No one heard her whisper, but if one had stood beneath the tower, they might have caught the faintest echo carried on the wind. Sleep well, my brother. You held the heavens still, that I might set them free. And in that moment, the moon itself seemed to bow. With Radahn's death, the spell that had bound the stars was broken. The sky pulsed with new light, not chaotic, but alive, breathing once more. Comets streaked across the horizon. The constellations shifted into new alignments, weaving new destinies for mortals below. Ranni felt their rhythm awaken within her. The silver chords of fate, once severed, began to hum with possibility. The cosmos had been unbound. The next phase of her design could now begin. Her tower, once silent, now pulsed faintly with energy, a rhythm that matched the heartbeat she no longer had. The world below still warred and suffered, but above it, the heavens turned once again, as they had before the Erd Tree claimed dominion. The stars remembered their freedom, and in their light, Ranni smiled. Radahn was the stillness to Ranni's motion, the gravity to her ascent. In halting the stars, he became both her obstacle and her savior, for without his strength, she might never have known what it meant to defy the cosmos. His life was the paradox of power. The stronger his grasp, the farther everything slipped beyond reach. And his death was the paradox of love, a release that gave birth to destiny. In the silent expanse of night, two forces had met, the red of earth and the blue of sky, and from their collision, the world began to turn again. For Ranni, this was not the end of her story. It was the beginning of the age she would one day claim. The stars had moved, the path was open, and somewhere deep within the cold light of the moon, a voice called her name. Chapter 7: The Tower of the Moon and the Three Shadows. In the northern cliffs of Liurnia, where the mist never fully lifts from the lake, three towers rise like the pale fingers of a forgotten god. They are silent, solemn structures, built of stone that gleams faintly beneath the moonlight. To most who wander the lake, they are mere ruins, ancient and unreachable. But those who approach with purpose, those who follow the path through Carian Manor's shimmering wards, will find that the towers are not ruins at all. They are the beating heart of Ranni's quiet rebellion. Ranni's rise, Renna's rise, and Sluvus's rise, three sanctums of knowledge, shadow, and deceit, united under one pale star. Long after the shattering, when the world tore itself apart in hunger for power, Ranni withdrew to her towers. While other demigods claimed castles, armies, and titles, she claimed silence. The Carian knights still patrolled the mists, their starlit blades flickering like fireflies among the trees. But within the towers themselves, the air was still. There was no fortress of conquest. It was a court of reflection. Here, Ranni gathered those who had severed themselves from the world, beings bound by loyalty, knowledge, or sorrow. Together, they formed a family not of blood, but of purpose. Her followers were few, but each was precious, a fragment of her design, a mirror of her philosophy. Three in particular would come to define her court: Sluvus, the puppeteer and scholar; war counselor Iji, the giant of gentle hands; and Blade, the loyal shadow bound to her soul. At the center stood Ranni's rise, her personal domain, a tower carved with lunar signals and enchanted with eternal frost. No wind stirred its banners, no bird dared perch upon its parapets. Within, a calm blue glow filled the halls, cast by crystals that shimmered like pieces of sky trapped in stone. Every surface reflected moonlight, the same cold radiance that pulsed faintly within the doll that housed her soul. Here Ranni sat, motionless but aware, upon a silver chair carved in the likeness of the crescent moon. From this seat, she watched the stars turn. Through her glintstone mirrors, she traced the movement of comets and the trembling of constellations. Each flicker of starlight whispered a secret, and Ranni listened with infinite patience. The tower was warded not by soldiers, but by spirit wolves, creatures of blue flame, bound by her sorcery to guard the threshold. Their eyes burned with her will. When intruders approached, the air grew cold, and silence fell heavy upon them, as though the world itself held its breath. Ranni's rise was not a place of power, but of observation. It was the eye of the storm, calm, focused, eternal. It was here that she began her final phase of her great design. To the east stood Renna's rise, a tower long sealed by enchantments. Its name was a tribute to her mentor, to the mask she once wore, and to the ideal she inherited: freedom through stillness. Renna's rise slept beneath the layers of frost, its gates were bound by invisible threads of moonlight, and its halls were frozen in perfect preservation, as though time itself had stopped. Few had ever entered it, and fewer still understood its purpose. Some believed it to be Ranni's true heart, a repository of her soul's memories before she died as Empyrean. Others whispered that within its depths, the spirit of the Snow Witch herself lingered, dreaming an endless dream. Whatever the truth, Renna's rise remained quiet, untouched, a monument to the teacher who had shown Ranni the way, and a reminder that silence was not absence, but endurance. To the west lay Saluvis's rise, a place of arrogance and secrets. Its master, Preceptor Saluvis, was a scholar of twisted ambition, a man who had once served at Rea Lucaria, but had been cast out for crimes unspeakable. He was brilliant, vain, and utterly faithless. Where others sought truth in the stars, he sought control. And in Ranni, he saw both a muse and a mystery. Saluvis studied the art of puppetry, the creation of lifelike vessels to house souls or echoes thereof. His halls were filled with mannequins that stood eerily still, their glassy eyes watching all who entered. He whispered that through this art, mortals could become gods, that life and death were merely illusions waiting to be rewritten by a clever enough hand. Ranni knew of his experiments. She did not approve, but she did not forbid them. Perhaps she saw in Saluvis's puppets a reflection of herself, another soul trapped in an artificial form, wrestling with the meaning of will. Or perhaps she merely pitied him, knowing that ambition, too, is a kind of prison. In time, Saluvis's curiosity would destroy him, but in those early days, he remained part of her circle, a necessary shadow in the light of her growing design. If Saluvis represented intellect without restraint, Iji was the opposite, wisdom without desire, a gentle giant with skin like burnished stone. He had once served as a blacksmith for the Carian knights, forging blades that gleamed with starlight. When the wars ended and his queen fell into madness, Iji laid down his hammer, choosing exile over allegiance. He found his way to Ranni's tower and knelt before her, pledging his service not to a throne, but to peace. To him, Ranni was not a witch or a goddess, but a daughter of the moon, carrying the hopes of a broken house. He became her war counselor, though she needed little counsel in war. He was her voice of patience, her anchor to the world of men. When the others schemed, Iji remained still. When the stars moved, he quietly kept watch. He reforged her sigils, maintained her wards, and built her defenses not for conquest, but for solitude. His loyalty was pure, untainted by ambition, and for that Ranni trusted him more than any other. And then there was Blade, her knight, her protector, her other self. He was not born, but made, a shadow created by the two fingers and bound to her soul at birth. Where she was calm, he was passion. Where she was cold, he burned with loyalty. They were halves of the same essence, two sides of the same star. In the early years, Blade served her faithfully, never questioning his bond. He followed her commands with joy, believing his purpose to be his own. But as Ranni's rebellion deepened, as she turned away from the greater will, Blade's nature began to fracture. The two fingers had bound him not just in body, but in spirit. If Ranni defied her destiny, Blade would be torn between two masters, her will and the will of the gods who created him. It was a cruel design, a safeguard to ensure no Empyrean could rise without divine control. Ranni understood this better than anyone. She knew that one day her dearest companion would be driven mad by the conflict in his soul, and yet she could not sever the bond, for to do so would destroy him completely. So she chose silence, and in silence she loved him. The longer Ranni's rebellion endured, the more the threads that bound her shadows began to fray. Seleuvis grew impatient, scheming behind her back to control her dull body through his puppetry. He believed he could make her submit, could force her to share her secrets of the soul. But he never understood that Ranni's stillness was not weakness, it was mastery. When his treachery was discovered, she ended him without anger. His puppets were left standing where they were, eyes blank, forever trapped in the moment of his folly. Thus fell the first shadow. Iji, ever the protector, sealed Seleuvis's tower to prevent the corruption from spreading. But he knew what would come next. He could feel Blade's turmoil growing, the wildness in his voice, the cracks in his calm. The shadow's loyalty had become pain. He raged at the world, at himself, at the gods who made him. When the madness finally took him, it was Iji who bore the sorrow of knowing. He reinforced his armor, strengthened his wards, and prayed that when the time came, someone gentle would end Blade's suffering. And in time, someone did. When all was done, when Seleuvis had fallen and Blade's howls had faded into mist, only Ranni remained. Her tower was quiet again, as it had been in the days of her awakening. The wind whispered through the broken stone. The wolves stood guard in silence. And above all, the moon shone, pale and unblinking. She had not wept for them. She could not. Her heart was still, her soul encased in porcelain. But within that stillness was memory, and memory, she had learned, was another form of love. They had each played their part. They had each walked with her through the night, and though she could not save them, she could carry them forward, their loyalty etched into the very pattern of her fate. Chapter 8. The Fate of the Tarnished, the Lunar Path Revealed. The stars had begun to move again. Their long stillness had ended, and with their motion, the threads of fate once more began to weave across the lands between. Where once their song had been silent, now a faint melody echoed through the night, soft and uncertain, but alive. It was in this renewed rhythm of the cosmos that the Tarnished entered Ranni's story, a nameless wanderer, stripped of grace, guided not by divine light, but by curiosity and will. They were not chosen by the greater will. They were not marked by lineage or prophecy. And yet the stars, long dormant, seemed to turn for them. When the Tarnished first climbed the misted cliffs of Liurnia and stood before the great moonlit towers, they might have expected danger. Instead, they found silence, the stillness of snow, the gentle hum of magic in the air. Spirit wolves guarded the path, but their eyes held no malice. They merely tested those who approached. Only those who carried within them the courage to seek truth without guidance were permitted to pass. Within the tower, she waited, Ranni, the Witch of the Moon, seated upon her silver throne, her porcelain face unmoving, her eyes glowing faintly with the light of distant stars. When she spoke, her voice was neither warm nor cold. It was measured, like the rhythm of tides under the moon's command. She introduced herself not as goddess nor ruler, but with quiet humility. I am the witch Ranni. I stole death long ago, and in my body I cast it away. It was not a boast, it was a confession, an admission of the sin that severed her from the world, and of the freedom she had purchased with her death. And in that moment, something subtle passed between them. Not grace, not fate, but recognition. For Ranni saw in the Tarnished the same defiance that had once stirred within her, the will to walk a path unlit by divine law. Ranni did not command. She offered, "Wouldst thou enter my service?" It was a simple question, but beneath it lay a test. Those who sought glory would refuse. Those who sought truth would accept. To serve Ranni was to turn one's back upon the Erdtree and its golden light, to choose the cold quiet of night over the warmth of day. Those who accepted were bound not by oath, but by understanding. In joining her, they became part of a design that stretched beyond mortality, a fragment of a plan that even the gods could not perceive. Ranni's attendants, e.g., Saluvis and Blade, welcomed the Tarnished with caution. Each, in their own way, watched to see if this new wanderer was worthy. But Ranni herself seemed to know. The stars had spoken, and their song had guided the Tarnished to her. And thus, the path of the dark moon began. Ranni's trust was not given freely. Before the Tarnished could share in their purpose, they had to prove their strength, their resolve, and their loyalty, not to her, but to themselves. The first test came through Seluvus, who sought to ensnare the Tarnished in his schemes of puppetry. He offered forbidden knowledge, promises of power. It was a temptation, a whisper of control, the same hubris that had consumed him. Those who accepted his bargains found only hollow reward. Those who refused earned Ranni's silent approval. The second test came through Iji, who guided the Tarnished towards the truth of Ranni's rebellion. He spoke of her defiance, her rejection of the greater will, and the weight of the burden she bore. He asked not for obedience, but for understanding. To serve Ranni was not to serve a god. It was to serve the idea of freedom itself. And the third test came through Blade, her faithful shadow. Together, he and the Tarnished hunted for the city of Nokron, the eternal city, lost beneath the earth. It was a journey that tested patience and trust alike, for beneath the surface of loyalty ran the current of tragedy. Blade's growing madness mirrored the danger of serving two masters, and the Tarnished, standing between them, came to understand the true cost of rebellion. Far below the lands between, beneath the ruins of civilization forgotten, lies Nokron, a mirror of the heavens carved into stone. Its streets shimmer with false starlight. Its sky is a sea of glowing dust. It is a place untouched by the Erd tree's roots, where the greater will holds no dominion. Here, Ranni's fate was written, and here it would be reclaimed. Guided by her will, the Tarnished descended into the depths, past rivers of silver tears and caverns that glowed like the inside of a crystal. They faced remnants of ancient guardians, shades of a people who had once defied the gods and been cast into shadow for it. Every echo of battle, every flicker of blue flame, spoke of the same story, the punishment of defiance, the price of freedom. At the heart of Nokron, the Tarnished found it, a blade blacker than night, forged from the essence of death itself, the Finger Slayer blade. This weapon, older than any order, held the power to cut the very cords that bound mortals to the will of the two fingers. It was both relic and key, the tool Ranni needed to sever herself from the divine forever. When the Tarnished returned with the Finger Slayer blade, Ranni spoke softly, as if to herself. At long last, the fate I sought begins to unfold. Her plan, long prepared, long dormant, was awakening. With this blade, she could destroy the link between herself and the two fingers, ending the last chain that bound her to the greater will. But this act was not vengeance. it was transcendence. To Ranni, rebellion had never been about overthrowing gods. It was about escaping their endless cycle of control. The pattern of ages where light and flame rise, only to fall again into ruin. The blade would not kill the two fingers. It would silence them. Their voice, the echo of the greater will, would no longer reach her. And when the Tarnished delivered the relic into her porcelain hands, she looked upon them with something almost like tenderness. Her glass eyes softened in the moonlight. Thou art a dear one indeed. It was not praise, it was gratitude, the quiet acknowledgement of another soul who understood. With the Finger Slayer blade in her possession, Ranni's rebellion became complete. She no longer heard the call of the gods. Her fate was her own. Yet she did not claim a throne, nor seek dominion. Instead, she vanished, her spirit withdrawing into the stars, leaving behind only whispers and moonlight. Her servants waited. Blade's madness worsened. Iji, in sorrow, locked himself away. The towers grew silent once more. But the Tarnished, guided now by fate unseen, followed the trail she left behind. It led them across the frozen north, into the secret paths of the moon. There, in the Cathedral of Manus Celis, beneath a sky of infinite dusk, they would find her once more, a figure lying in repose, her form faintly glowing in the light of the dark moon. And when she awoke, the stars seemed to hold their breath. Ranni spoke not of conquest, but of promise. She offered the Tarnished a choice, not the illusion of grace, but the freedom of night. I am Ranni the Witch. 'Twas my destiny to sever the order of the world. Now cometh the age of stars, an age of fear, of loneliness perhaps, but of freedom absolute. It was a vow as much as it was an invitation. The Tarnished could refuse and remain bound to the Erd tree, or they could accept and walk with her into the dark beyond the gods. The choice was theirs alone, and in that choice, Ranni's dream, the dream of a world without divine command, was realized. For the first time since the beginning of the Erd tree's age, a soul had been granted true agency. When the Tarnished accepted her offer, the world did not tremble. The skies did not split. There was no sound of war, no song of triumph, only stillness, the kind that comes after a long storm, when the air is clean and the stars are visible once more. Ranni's form shimmered, dissolving into soft motes of light. Her voice echoed like a memory across the void. Come, my dear consort, together let us chart the path anew. The Erd tree's golden light faded into the distance. The two fingers lay dead, their words of obedience silenced. And in the cold, quiet vastness of night, a new journey began, one not written in gold, but in and silver. The age of gods had ended. The age of stars had begun. Ranni's story and the Tarnished are not tales of heroism or victory. They are tales of understanding, of two souls who saw the truth of a world ruled by divine will and chose to step beyond it. For Ranni, freedom had been purchased through death. For the Tarnished, it came through a choice. Together, they embodied the two halves of rebellion, sacrifice and decision. And though the world below would one day forget their names, the stars would remember. Their light would shimmer faintly in the night sky, not as command, but as promise that somewhere beyond the reach of any god, two souls journeyed together beneath the dark moon, charting a new course through eternity. Chapter 9: The Age of Stars, the Marriage of Moon and Tarnished. The moonlight in the cathedral of Manus Celis was not true light. It shimmered through the deep cracks of the earth, soft and distant, a reflection of a reflection. Beneath that silver glow lay the resting form of Ranni the Witch, her porcelain body still as glass, her pale fingers folded over a heart. The Tarnished approached in silence. Around them, the cathedral walls shimmered with veins of glintstone, their surfaces faintly pulsing with the heartbeat of the cosmos. The air was cool, but not cold. The stillness before the tide changes, the hush before the dawn, though dawn would never come again. When the Tarnished touched her hand, Ranni stirred. Her eyes opened, twin mirrors of the night sky. For the first time since the night of the black knives, she smiled, not with joy nor sorrow, but with recognition. Her voice rose softly, echoing through the still chamber, like a lullaby carried by starlight. At long last, I am returned. 'Twas thee who guided me thus far, my most dear consort. The words were gentle, but their weight was immeasurable. In them lay centuries of longing, the echo of every moment that had led her here. The shattering, her death, her solitude, her waiting. All of it had been for this, to find one who would walk beside her, not as subject nor servant, but as equal. She rose from her resting place, her dull body glowing faintly with lunar radiance. The stars above the cathedral shimmered brighter, and the faint hum of the cosmos, the rhythm that had once been frozen, now pulsed in harmony with her voice. The Tarnished knelt, not in reverence, but in understanding. For Ranni was no goddess to be worshipped. She had destroyed that very idea. In the age of the Erd Tree, gods had ruled by grace, their will absolute, their light unquestioned. But Ranni's moonlight was different. Where the Erd Tree's radiance blinded, the moon revealed. Where grace commanded, starlight invited. And where the gods demanded kneeling, Ranni offered her hand. She spoke again. Now cometh the age of stars, an age of fear, of loneliness perhaps, but of freedom absolute. Let us go together, my dear consort, forevermore. No vows were exchanged, no ceremony held. Theirs was not a marriage of the flesh, nor of politics, nor of ritual. It was the joining of two wills, the first true union of equals since the beginning of the world. The Tarnished took her hand, and the world began to fade. As their fingers intertwined, the moon above grew vast, its light washing over the cathedral like a tide. The stone melted into mist. The glintstone veins became constellations. The ground beneath them dissolved into a sea of silver. The world of the Erd Tree receded. Its roots, its thrones, its wars, all vanishing into the distance as the two ascended into the sky. They rose beyond the reach of faith, beyond the whisper of the greater will, past the edge of the firmament, where stars are born and die in silence. There was no pain, no sound, no sense of direction, only drifting, infinite and serene. For this was not ascension, it was departure. They were leaving the world behind to let it find its own way, free from the yoke of divine command. In the quiet between worlds, Ranni spoke again. Her voice was fainter now, yet clear as the stars themselves. Mine will be the order of the stars and the moon of darkness, 1,000-year voyage under the cold light of night, and the fear, doubt, and loneliness of it all. Her words were not a promise of paradise, they were an acknowledgement of truth. Freedom is not comfort. Choice is not peace. The age of stars would not bring salvation. It would bring uncertainty. And in that uncertainty, the first true chance for life to mean something again. The Tarnished listened in silence, their heart beating softly against the endless quiet. They understood what Ranni had done. She had broken the cycle of gods and flames, severed the golden order of eternity, and opened the cosmos to all beings. Every soul would now be free to choose, not guided by grace, not watched by divine eyes. For the first time, the universe belonged to itself. The dark moon was not the absence of light. It was light turned inward, illumination that revealed not the world, but the self. Ranni had long been called its emissary, its priestess, its daughter, but in truth, she became it. The dark moon was her soul made manifest, the still reflection of her rebellion, the quiet wisdom of solitude. Where Marika's Erd Tree had rooted itself into the earth, Ranni's moon drifted freely through the void. Where Marika commanded, Ranni withdrew. Where Marika imprisoned death, Ranni embraced it as part of the cosmic rhythm. The golden light had shone upon the world and demanded obedience. The silver light of the dark moon shimmered from afar and asked nothing. It did not rule, it allowed In this way, Ranni's ascension was not conquest, it was a relinquishment. She did not claim the throne, she left it empty, and by doing so, she gave every living being the right to choose its own path. The gods had always spoken in commands. Ranni's silence was their undoing. As the two voyaged deeper into the void, they passed the remnants of forgotten worlds, burnt-out stars, drifting gods, faded echoes of civilizations that had once believed themselves eternal. Ranni looked upon them without judgment, for she knew that all light, even divine light, must one day fade. The Erd tree would wither in time. The flames of chaos would cool. Even the moon itself would dim. But meaning would remain, for meaning, she had discovered, was not born of eternity, but of transience. The Tarnished asked nothing, spoke nothing. In their stillness, they understood. To journey with Ranni was to accept impermanence. To love her was to accept distance. To serve her was to serve the silence that made all things possible. 1,000 years is a measure without measure. In the cosmic expanse, time ceases to flow as mortals understand it. Yet within that boundless journey, something changed. The stars that had once trembled in fear of the Erd tree's light began to glow brighter. They pulsed with new rhythm, free, chaotic, and alive. Worlds began to form again, spinning into the quiet of the void. From the fragments of what was lost, new life emerged, not bound by fate, but guided by curiosity. This was the true gift of the dark moon, that even in silence, creation continues, that even in cold, life persists, that even in death, something endures. Ranni and her consort did not command this rebirth. They merely watched it, like artists stepping back from their canvas, content to let the world paint itself. There is a beauty in distance, in knowing that one cannot hold what one loves, only accompany it. That is the love of the dark moon. Ranni and the Tarnished did not share the closeness of mortals. Their union was not of touch, but of purpose. In her stillness, he found peace. In his persistence, she found meaning. Together, they drifted through eternity, not seeking, not fleeing, simply being. Theirs was the purest form of companionship, not defined by need, but by understanding, not bound by the body, but by shared resolve. They had chosen to walk the path with no end, and in that endlessness, they found serenity. Every 1,000 years, the stars would whisper their names, not as rulers, not as gods, but as travelers. The witch and her consort, who once walked the lands between and chose the silence beyond. Far below, the world continued. The Erd tree still glowed faintly on the horizon, its roots spreading, but its power waning. Those who remained beneath its branches lived and died without the certainty of grace. Some mourned the loss of the gods, others celebrated their absence. The cycles of war and peace continued, but they were no longer dictated by divine decree. For the first time in history, the world moved according to mortal will alone. And though the people did not know her name, they lived beneath the light of her legacy, the quiet freedom of night. Each time the moon rose, they saw it differently. To some, it was a symbol of mystery. To others, a reminder of loss. But to the few who remembered, it was a promise that even beneath the darkest sky, there is a beauty in the absence of control. The Age of Stars was not an age of conquest. It was not an age of gods, nor of men. It was an age of quiet, of reflection, uncertainty, and possibility. Ranni's final act was not to rule, but to relinquish rule forever. She cast aside the crown, turned from the throne, and walked into eternity, hand in hand with the one who understood. Her story is not one of triumph or tragedy, but of liberation, a story that began in death and ended in freedom. In the silence of the void, beneath the gaze of the dark moon, Ranni the Witch smiled once more, and the stars answered. For though the world below would one day forget her name, the sky would never forget her light. And so, under the quiet light of the dark moon, our story comes to rest. If you've drifted this far with me, thank you for sharing the journey. May the stars guide your dreams tonight, and may you wake with peace in your heart. If you'd like to wander further into the lore of these worlds, please consider leaving a like and subscribing, and joining me again next time for another story to sleep to. Until then, rest well.